Imagine the last person you ever wanted to see again. The person who destroyed your confidence, who twisted your mind, who tore you apart emotionally, lying unconscious, on a stretcher, in your care. You're a professional, a trauma surgeon, but inside, your heart races, your hands shake, and the past you fought so hard to forget comes rushing back in a flood of rage and fear. What would you do? Save them? Or take control and finally make them pay for everything they did to you? Let's begin. Dr. Vanessa Harper had worked hard to escape her past. The painful memories of her emotionally abusive marriage to Gregory had been buried deep, locked away in the recesses of her mind. After their divorce 5 years ago, she'd rebuilt herself, focusing on her career, her independence, and her healing. She had become a respected trauma surgeon, admired by her colleagues for her skill and her strength. Her personal life had remained simple and undisturbed. But all of that was about to change. It was just another night in the ER when the paramedics wheeled him in. The patient, severely injured in what appeared to be a violent car crash, was barely conscious. But as Vanessa's eyes flicked to his face, she froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Gregory, the man she had fought so hard to forget. He was lying on the stretcher, bleeding from a deep gash across his forehead, his body bruised and battered. Despite the injuries, it was unmistakably him. "Dr. Harper, we need your help," the nurse said, urgently pulling Vanessa from her shock. Vanessa's mind raced, her pulse quickened. For a moment, she didn't know how to react. Her heart pounded in her chest, and memories of his cold, calculating behavior flooded back in an instant. Gregory, who had once controlled every aspect of her life, was now the one who needed saving. He was in her care. Her first instinct was to turn away, to refuse to treat him, and to pretend he wasn't there. But Vanessa was a professional. She had sworn an oath to help those in need, no matter the past. Taking a deep breath, she forced her emotions to the back of her mind and stepped forward. "Get him into Trauma 3, she instructed, her voice steady, betraying none of the chaos inside her. Her team scrambled to act. Vanessa was all business now, her mind focused on the medical procedures at hand. But inside, her stomach twisted with dread. The man who had made her feel small, weak, and unloved was now vulnerable, and that power dynamic had shifted. She glanced at his face again. The bruises, the blood. He looked nothing like the man she had once known. He was just another patient now, but the thought didn't ease the knot in her stomach. Vanessa moved quickly, setting up the IV, monitoring his vitals. She felt the weight of his presence in a way she hadn't expected. He was in her life again, but this time she wasn't the powerless woman she once was. She was in control. "Don't make me do this," she whispered under her breath, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the equipment. She could feel his eyes on her, but she couldn't show him any weakness. He had no power here, not anymore. Vanessa fought to keep her composure, but inside, the familiar anxiety was starting to bubble to the surface. Her colleagues were becoming more concerned as the hours wore on. They watched as she deftly performed her duties, but couldn't ignore the subtle unease in her movements. Her hands were steady, yes, but her fingertips trembled ever so slightly. When she glanced at Gregory, her breath hitched, her chest tightening in a way she couldn't explain. "Are you okay, Dr. Harper?" Dr. Lee asked softly, noticing her disquiet. Vanessa glanced up, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, just focused on the patient." But she wasn't fine. Every time she stepped closer to Gregory, memories from their marriage came flooding back. The way he would manipulate her emotions, how he'd belittled her every chance he got, how he controlled her thoughts until she'd forgotten her own worth. She had buried it all, pushed it away, until now. Gregory, the man who had emotionally and mentally broken her, was once again in her life, forcing her to confront the past she'd tried so desperately to escape. Despite her professional training, Vanessa's heart raced. Her breath became shallow whenever she caught his eye, and she could feel the old power dynamic between them creep back in. She had left him, escaped, built a new life, but he was still capable of making her feel helpless. She had learned to survive without him, but not without the scars he'd left behind. It didn't help that Gregory wasn't unconscious for long. His eyes flickered open, and for a moment, his gaze met hers. That cold, calculating look, a look she hadn't seen in years, sent a chill down her spine. He was awake. He was watching her. He knew exactly what he was doing. Vanessa forced herself to look away, focusing on the monitors in front of her. She couldn't show weakness. She had to stay strong. But as the minutes ticked by, she realized it was impossible to escape him now. She had been trying to rebuild her life without him, but the past always had a way of catching up. Vanessa spent the next few hours in a haze of activity, trying to stay focused on Gregory's care. But every step she took felt like she was walking through quicksand. She couldn't shake the feeling of his presence, couldn't stop thinking about the man he had been to her. Their marriage had been a web of deceit and manipulation. At first, Gregory was charming, and his love felt like a warm embrace, but it wasn't long before the cracks started to show. The emotional abuse, the cruel words, the mental games that left Vanessa questioning her self-worth. She had given everything to him, and in return, he had taken more than just her happiness. He had taken her sense of self. Gregory's face, now bruised and battered from the accident, almost looked like a stranger's, but beneath the physical damage, there was something in his eyes, a dangerous glimmer of the man she once feared. Her mind flashed back to the arguments they had, the late nights where he would tear her down, making her feel as though she would never be good enough. "You're nothing without me," he'd said, his words cutting deep. He had believed it, and for a while so had she. Now here he was, vulnerable and weak, and Vanessa had to ask herself, was she strong enough to face him again? Could she be the professional doctor she'd trained to be, and not let the past haunt her? Or would she let him slip away, unscathed, from the one moment where she could have exacted revenge for everything he had done to her? "Keep it together," Vanessa whispered to herself, her hands trembling as she adjusted the medication. She was no longer that woman. Gregory didn't have power over her anymore. She was strong. She had built a life without him, one that didn't depend on his cruel games or his ability to manipulate her, but it was hard to feel that strength when the ghosts of her past had walked back into her life. As she looked at him lying unconscious, she realized that this was her moment. She could heal him. She could save him. Or she could finally confront the man who had made her life a living hell. But what would it cost her? Vanessa's worst fears were realized when she discovered that Gregory's stay in the hospital was no accident. It wasn't just about his injuries, it was about control. As she reviewed his medical history and spoke to other doctors, she learned that Gregory had used his connections to ensure that she was the one assigned to his case. His influence stretched beyond the hospital. He had arranged for everything, his injuries, the timing, the manipulation, to place him directly in her path. Gregory was playing a game, and Vanessa was the pawn. She felt the anger rising in her chest. For all these years, she had thought she was free of him, but now he was here, using the one thing she could never refuse, her medical oath, to draw her back into his life. This wasn't about healing. This was about him making her feel small again, making her feel like she owed him something. He had always done this, using his wealth and influence to control people, and now he was trying to do it to her. Vanessa paced around the hospital room, trying to breathe through the anger that was building inside her. She had dealt with this before. Gregory's manipulation, his lies, his mind games. But now, she was no longer the woman she had been. She was stronger. She was a doctor, a professional, and she wasn't going to let him win. But it was hard to ignore the knot in her stomach, the cold realization that this was all part of his plan. He had always been 2 steps ahead of her. Always. "I'll be damned if I let him do this to me again," Vanessa muttered under her breath. Her resolve hardened. She wouldn't let him control her life anymore. This time, she would expose him for what he truly was, nothing but a manipulator hiding behind a mask of charm. The more Vanessa dug into Gregory's life, the more she uncovered. The injuries he sustained were no accident. The story he told the doctors about a car crash didn't add up. As Vanessa looked over his records, it became clear that the accident had been staged, planned carefully, with one goal in mind: to force her back into his life. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Gregory wasn't here because of bad luck. He was here because he had orchestrated it. The whole thing had been a manipulation, a way for him to regain control, and Vanessa had walked right into it. She closed the file with a sharp snap, her breath coming in short bursts. The anger inside her bubbled over. All these years, she had thought she was free. She thought she had finally escaped the mental and emotional prison he had built around her. But he had been waiting, planning, knowing exactly how to reel her back in. "Damn it, Gregory," Vanessa muttered under her breath. Her mind raced, and the weight of the situation started to sink in. If she allowed Gregory to continue with this game, he would slowly worm his way back into her life. He would control her once more. He knew exactly how to make her feel guilty, to make her second-guess herself. But this time would be different. Vanessa had learned too much. She had spent years rebuilding herself and her career, and she wasn't going to let Gregory destroy everything she had worked so hard for. The time for playing his games was over. As she stood by his hospital bed later that night, she made a decision. She wasn't going to save him just because he was her patient. She wasn't going to let him manipulate her with his charm and his lies anymore. This was her moment. She would do what needed to be done. Not for him, but for herself. She would stop him from gaining control again. "Let's see how far you're willing to go to keep your grip on me, Gregory," Vanessa whispered as she stared down at his unconscious form. As Vanessa continued her investigation into Gregory's life, she uncovered even more shocking truths. Not only had Gregory staged the accident, but he had been hiding affairs and using his power to manipulate everyone around him, including the women he had been seeing while they were married. She was both disgusted and enraged as she read through the details. The betrayal was far deeper than she had ever imagined. He hadn't just hurt her, he had hurt many others, using his wealth, status, and charm to manipulate everyone he came into contact with. Vanessa had been so wrapped up in her own pain from the marriage that she hadn't realized the full extent of his deceit. She had been one of many victims, each one of them unknowingly trapped in his web of lies. But now, armed with the truth, Vanessa could see the full picture. Gregory had never been loyal. He had never been trustworthy. He had never loved her, not the way she had loved him. Her heart hardened as the realization hit her. This wasn't just about getting revenge for what he did to her. It was about stopping him from destroying others. She had to expose him, for everyone's sake. Vanessa spent the next few days planning her next move. She knew she had to be careful. Gregory was dangerous when cornered. He had a way of making people believe that he was the victim, that he was the one who had been wronged. But Vanessa wasn't going to fall for that again. She would expose him for the monster he truly was, and this time there would be no turning back. As Vanessa prepared to expose Gregory's manipulations, she found herself faced with an unexpected obstacle. Dr. Isaac Mitchell, a trusted colleague, had been acting strangely for weeks. At first, she thought it was just her paranoia, but the more she observed him, the more she realized something was off. Isaac had been supportive of her during her difficult marriage. always offering advice and a listening ear, but now it seemed as though he was working against her. One afternoon, as Vanessa was reviewing some of Gregory's old medical records, she overheard Isaac speaking to another doctor in hushed tones. His words were laced with suspicion, casting doubt on her professionalism. He was subtly undermining her, suggesting that Vanessa had personal motives that were clouding her judgment in treating Gregory. Vanessa's heart sank. She had always trusted Isaac, but now she saw him for what he truly was, a pawn in Gregory's game. It wasn't enough that Gregory had been manipulating her. Now his influence had reached into the hospital, into her circle of colleagues. She needed to confront Isaac, but she had to do it carefully. Isaac was clever, and his loyalty to Gregory had only just begun to surface. He had been an ally in the past, but now he was an enemy. Vanessa caught up with Isaac later that evening as they both stood by the nurse's station. He gave her a knowing look, one that sent chills down her spine. "You've been working closely with Gregory, haven't you?" Vanessa asked, keeping her voice steady. Isaac hesitated, clearly caught off guard by her directness. "What are you talking about, Vanessa?" "I know what you're doing," she said quietly, leaning in so only he could hear. "And I'm not going to let you drag me down with him." Isaac's smile was cold, calculated. "You think you can take him down, don't you? Well, you're not the only one playing the game here." The words hit Vanessa hard, but they also ignited a fire inside her. Isaac had chosen his side, and it was time for Vanessa to take the fight to him. She couldn't let Gregory, or his enablers, destroy everything she had worked so hard to build. Isaac was now another enemy in her war, one she would have to dismantle if she wanted to finally take control of her life again. Vanessa's plan to expose Gregory and Isaac was progressing, but the pressure was beginning to take its toll. She had never imagined that her fight for freedom would be so all-consuming, but as she fought against the manipulation and deceit surrounding her, she found herself slowly unraveling. One evening, after an exhausting shift in the ER, Vanessa sat alone in her office. The dim lighting only added to the weight pressing on her shoulders. She was still piecing together the evidence she needed to expose Gregory and Isaac, but something about the way Isaac had spoken to her lingered in her mind. The fight was growing personal now. Isaac wasn't just a colleague, he was a true enemy, and she had no idea how deep his involvement went. Her mind raced as she wondered if she had missed something. Was Isaac just a pawn in Gregory's game? Or was he a willing participant in all of this? How much control did Gregory really have over him? The tension was starting to break her. She could feel the exhaustion in her bones, the pressure weighing on her chest. Every decision, every move she made seemed to come with another consequence. Gregory was like a shadow, always looming in the background, and now Isaac had become another force trying to tear her down. As Vanessa sat in silence, she realized that she couldn't continue like this. She needed help. She couldn't do this alone. She had to confront her past, face Gregory head-on, and finally take control of her future. But the stakes were higher now. Her career, her personal life, and her peace of mind were all on the line. And no matter what, she knew she had to win this battle, once and for all. Vanessa stood in front of Gregory's hospital room, her heart pounding in her chest. The moment had arrived. She had exposed his lies, uncovered his manipulations, and dismantled everything he had built. But there was still one thing left to do. She needed to confront him. She pushed open the door, stepping into the sterile room where Gregory lay, still recovering from his injuries. His eyes flickered open as he heard her footsteps, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he looked vulnerable. No longer the man who had controlled her life, no longer the man who had broken her. Vanessa wasn't the same woman who had once feared him. She had grown stronger, smarter, and more powerful than he could ever have imagined. And now, it was her turn to take control. Gregory sneered at her, his lips curling into a smug smile. "You think you've won, don't you?" Vanessa took a deep breath, her voice steady and calm. "You were never the one in control, Gregory. You just manipulated me into believing you were. You used me, used my kindness, my trust, to get what you wanted, but no more." Gregory's eyes narrowed, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "You think you figured it all out, don't you? But you've only scratched the surface. You're nothing without me. You'll always need me." Vanessa shook her head, her voice unwavering. "Not anymore. You're nothing to me now. You were never my salvation, just my cage." Her words hit him like a slap. The mask he had worn for so long, a man in control, a man who could bend others to his will, finally cracked. She could see the desperation in his eyes, the fear of losing everything. But it was too late. The tables had turned. She stepped forward, standing tall and proud as Gregory's bravado crumbled. "I'm done with you. Your lies, your games, they end now. And for everyone else you've hurt, for every woman you've manipulated, you will face the consequences of your actions. I'm not saving you this time." Gregory's face twisted with rage as he struggled to sit up. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." But Vanessa didn't flinch. She was done being afraid. This was her victory. As she turned to leave, she felt a sense of closure wash over her. Gregory had been her tormentor, but now he was nothing more than a powerless man lying in a hospital bed, unable to hurt anyone ever again. The game was over. Vanessa had won. It had been weeks since Vanessa had exposed Gregory for the manipulator he was. She had lost her fear and regained her power, but the battle wasn't completely over. She had taken control, yes, but the final blow was yet to come. Vanessa was sitting in her office, reviewing the final paperwork that would end Gregory's reign of terror once and for all. The truth had come out. His lies, his manipulation, his deceit. It was all out in the open now, and the consequences were swift. Gregory had been arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including blackmail, fraud, and emotional abuse. The news had spread like wildfire, and his once pristine reputation had been shattered beyond repair. His wealth, his connections, all of it was slipping through his fingers. But the most satisfying part, Gregory's downfall, was sealed by the one person he never thought would turn on him, Vanessa herself. She had gathered evidence of his crimes, shared her story with the authorities, and testified against him in court. Her voice had been the one to take him down. Now, as she watched the news coverage of his trial, she felt a sense of closure. Karma had come full circle, and it was sweeter than she could have ever imagined. Gregory had thought he was untouchable, that he could control everyone in his life. But in the end, it was his own actions that destroyed him, and Vanessa had been the one to make sure he faced the consequences. As the camera focused on Gregory being escorted out of the courthouse, his face pale and defeated, Vanessa couldn't help but smile. This was the moment of redemption, the moment she had waited for. She had rebuilt her life, and now she was finally free. Gregory's wealth, his power, his influence, none of it mattered anymore. He was nothing. Vanessa turned to leave her office, her steps light and full of purpose. She had taken control of her life, and nothing could stop her now. As she walked out of the hospital, she reflected on how far she had come. She had survived the worst of what Gregory had thrown at her, and now she was thriving. "Time for a new chapter," she whispered to herself, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "And this one is all mine." If you enjoyed this twist-filled journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Stories by Laine for more unforgettable drama and surprises. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. Thanks for watching, and remember, twists you will not see coming await in every chapter.